Hi, I'm Dr. Ellie Jameson. I'm here for another week of science, and we're going to talk about forensic science today. So we're going to find out what is forensic science and how can it help us, and then we're going to make some bloods and do some fingerprinting. So forensic science is using science to help solve crimes. So it involves looking for clues, investigating crimes, and answering questions. And it shouldn't decide on its own who's done a crime or what the crime was, but it just gives scientific answers and helps to establish if somebody was there when a crime was committed or who might have been able to do it and how things happened. So it uses scientific evidence from biology, chemistry, physics, psychology, social sciences, geology, and entomology, which is the study of insects as well, to look at things. So it might look at the murder victim, so it would take their body to look at the bones, so what injuries they might have, look at the teeth, because using dental records we might be able to tell who the person is if we can't see the face properly, and also it might help us learn about the time of death and where they died. So you can find lots of information about the victim there, but you can also find out who might have been there when a crime was committed. So if you can place someone at the crime scene, then you've got a better chance of working out who might have done something. So we can look at things like fingerprints to see who was there, look for evidence like hair, piece of clothing, or blood, or maybe even look at gunshot residue as well. And by looking at things like blood and hair, we might be able to extract a person's DNA. So DNA is a unique genetic code, so that'll tell us if that person is likely to have been there or not. So today we're going to look a bit about blood. So we're going to make some fake blood, and then we're going to look at like what kind of patterns they can make. So to make the fake blood, we're going to take 75 grams of icing sugar. So I've got some icing sugar. I'm going to take some red food dye. I'm going to take some cocoa powder, and then water as well. So I'm mixing together 75 grams of icing sugar, 1 teaspoon of the food dye, half a teaspoon of our cocoa powder, and then 120 mils of water. So mix these together, and we've got something which is a little bit gloopy, but mostly wet. So it should be a bit similar in colour and consistency to blood. And then using that, we can look at these patterns that blood makes to work out if somebody was just dripping blood, if they'd been hit by something, and things like this. So we can do a few different marks on our piece of paper. So if we practice dropping a blood from a height, so you can do it at different heights. We can look at splatter, so we just put a tiny bit on and we shake. Or we can, if you dip a sponge in it and put a sponge on a piece of paper, maybe do this outside because it's quite messy, and then you hit that sponge with maybe a rolling pin or some kind of rubber mallet, then you can make a splatter that might happen if somebody got hit. And then you can look at your different marks that you made, and then if somebody was hit an angle against the wall, it'll make a different mark than if it's just dropped straight from above as well. And then you might get smears of blood. So if a person rubs up against something as they walk past, you'll get a different shape of blood. And so look at the blood splatters, but you can work out how an accident happened, if it was just an accident or if there might have been someone else involved, if they got hit by something, so a falling tree or hit by someone else, then you can kind of work it out a bit by the blood splatter patterns. So you can look at those blood splatter patterns and make your own patterns and try and work out if they were dropped or thrown or something was hit. So you can play around with your fake blood, and it's also quite tasty. So it's just sugar and cocoa powder and food dye. So if you get it in your mouth, it doesn't matter. And then also fingerprints. So by looking at fingerprints that have been left at crime scenes, so that's something's hard surfaces are the easiest to get fingerprints from. So on windows, on glasses that you drink from, maybe on doors and door handles. People, if they've got a tiny bit of grease on their finger, can leave a fingerprints behind. And fingerprints are really important because everyone's fingerprints on their fingers are unique, and they have a mix of different shapes in there. So they were formed in the womb, and they've got different shapes, and it stays pretty much the same throughout your life, unless you get cuts on your fingers, and then that might damage it. But there's different shapes that they look for when they're looking at fingerprints, unique bits. So these are loops, so kind of U shapes. walls, which are kind of swirls or whirlpool shapes, and arches, so like waves on there. So by identifying these unique parts from people's fingerprints, you can work out who might have done the fingerprints. So what we've been doing is we've been making some fingerprints for us, and then we're taking these and then seeing if we can work out who's been holding a glass. So if you want to get the fingerprints off a glass, you can do something called dusting for prints. So you get the fingerprints on there, and with a very soft brush, you just gently cover it over with powder. So I'm using cocoa powder, but you could try something else. You could use talcum powder, and then, so it's all about how good you are and how delicate you are at doing this. So once you've got your fingerprints and your fingerprint covered up with your dust, you can try and take it off with a piece of sellotape. So this is quite tricky, but it's quite good fun. So have you ever seen that when you take sellotape off, you might accidentally get your fingerprint on it, or it'll leave a mark of your fingerprint behind. So that's what we're trying to do with these cups that we've covered over with our dusting powder, so our cocoa powder. Just trying to remove the fingerprint, and then you can stick this on a piece of paper to keep that fingerprint while you try and work out whose fingerprint it matches best. So it might take a bit of practice, you might need to do it a few times, and then by putting it next to the fingerprints and comparing the different shapes of those whirls and arches, and then we can work out who might have left those fingerprints behind. So we've got lots of fingerprints to make, and you've got some blood to play with. So have fun doing those, and see you next week. And next week we're going to be doing poo. So we're going to be finding all about poo.